My sister and best friend plotted behind my back to erase me from my parents' will, but they never expected I'd uncover the truth. I always thought the night my sons were born would be the peak memory that everything else in my life would orbit. Even now, if I close my eyes, I can feel the hospital air, that scrubbed, lemon and bleach sharpness, and the odd hush of a maternity ward at 3 a.m. The room was too bright, the world too soft, and when the nurse placed two bundled bundles in my arms, my sense of self stretched to make room. Two names, two futures, two heartbeats ticking under cotton like small, insistent fists on a door that only I could open. People like to pretend they can spot destiny in newborn faces. I couldn't. Both boys were pink and outraged and perfect, and when I tried to decide who looked like me, it felt like choosing a favorite star in a clear sky. Over the next few weeks, differences trickled in quietly. One slept a fraction longer, one had a stronger latch, one studied the ceiling fan like a philosopher surprised by a new universe. The sort of differences parents turn into stories later. The kind no one outside your family ever really understands. What I didn't notice, what I told myself I didn't notice, always appeared in photographs first. Phones are ruthless historians. They freeze what your mind smooths over. In the early months, I filled a cloud drive with evidence that I was doing it, really doing it. Midnight feedings, sunrise walks, two car seats like thrones in the back seat of my dusty sedan. And then, around their first birthday, I took a picture on a bench at the park and felt something gather in my chest like a weather system. In that photo, I'm half smiling, squinting into winter light, and both boys are balanced on my knees. On the left is a face I recognize instinctively. There's the crescent-shaped notch in the ear that runs down my father's side, the same cowlick that forced barbers to fight me from age 6 onward. Even the eyes, wide-set, dark, almost solemn, look like an echo. But on the right, the other face is its own translation. The eyes are lighter, flecked, a green hazel that shifts with the light. The bridge of the nose is fine, not the blunt line I see every morning in the mirror. The mouth has an unfamiliar bow to the upper lip, like a careful painter favored a different brush when the time came that I told myself it was nothing but the lottery of genetics. Brothers don't have to match like photocopies. Twins, even more so. Fraternal twins can look like cousins, strangers, anyone at all. I said these sentences to myself the way people recite prayers they barely believe until the words start to feel like furniture in the room. Solid, inevitable. There, the mind doesn't break cleanly. It frays. My fraying began in parentheses, little asides that attach themselves to ordinary life. During bath time, I'd see one boy's hands floating like pale leaves, my hands exactly, and I'd feel something like recognition. With the other, I'd notice the shape of his feet, the way his toes tapered elegant and long, and I'd think of nobody in my family at all. When my aunt visited, she brought an old album and insisted on flipping until she found a photo of me at 2 in a stiff sweater, head tilted, considering the camera like it might be a friend or a threat. One son looked like a copy laid over the image. The other looked like a beautiful stranger. I hadn't planned to keep any of this to myself. In families, differences are usually celebrations. You point at a dimple or a laugh and declare it inherited. But every time I went to say something, my throat tightened. The words tasted accusatory even when I wasn't accusing anyone. So I swallowed them and filled the space with fatherhood. Diapers. Doctors. Nightmares soothed by pacing a thin figure 8 into the rug between crib and rocker. If there's a cure for intrusive thoughts, it's fatigue. Time, however, is a meticulous accountant. At 18 months, a pediatrician mentioned growth curves and percentiles. One of the boys was charting along the same curve as me at that age, according to the records my mother proudly produced from a file cabinet that smelled like old paper in winter. The other was arching upward in a different pattern entirely, taller, leaner, a graph line that rose like a hand at the back of the class. The doctor smiled and called it healthy variety. I nodded along, grateful for any official stamp of normalcy, that I wanted normal so badly that I tried to bully the universe into providing it. I scheduled matching haircuts and bought the same shoes in 2 sizes. I photographed them in identical outfits on the porch and captioned the pictures with twin emojis, as if labels could turn the underlying math into what I needed. But at night, I'd lie awake with my phone 3 inches from my face, flicking between images, looking for my father's nose, my grandfather's stubborn chin, my mother's eyes. One face always gave itself up immediately. The other made me work, and when I found echoes of resemblance there, they felt earned, like I was convincing the picture to cooperate, and no one else said anything. That silence became another character in our house. It sat at the table with us during spaghetti nights, followed us into the yard where toy trucks left archaeologies of plastic tracks in the garden soil, rode in the car to daycare while the radio muttered morning news. My wife, my then wife, though I didn't know to call her that yet, was tired in the way only motherhood can make you. She poured her energy into schedules and meals and tiny socks that vanished like tax dollars. When we spoke about the boys, it was about fevers and favorite books, and why they seemed to find the dog's water bowl more interesting than any toy. If she noticed what I was noticing, she kept it in the same room where I kept my feared. I remember the exact moment the weather system in my chest turned from unsettled to storm. It was an ordinary Tuesday, laundry tumbling in the machine, the house carrying that humid, cottony heat of a dryer in a small hallway. The boys were 2.5 and racing from room to room with the elastic joy that tends to end in bruises and naps. They crashed into me, and I scooped them up, one on each hip. In the mirror over our mantel, I caught the three of us in a single reflection. One face next to mine looked like repetition, like history doing what it does. The other looked like an unknown future that I put them down, stepped closer to the glass, and for the first time let the forbidden sentence finish forming in my head. What if only one of them is mine? The thought didn't feel like a betrayal in that moment. It felt like a key sliding into an old lock, an unclicking I'd been resisting because I didn't know what would swing open. I stood there listening to the dryer thud socks into the drum and the boys invent rules for a game with no name. And I understood that questions don't disappear when you starve them. They learn to hunt. That night, after the house had quieted and the windows had turned into dark mirrors, I opened a search engine and typed phrases I never imagined I would need. I read about fraternal twins and the fickle theater of genetics. I read about mistakes and miracles, and then my cursor hovered over articles about testing, protocols and percentages, swabs and chain of custody forms, things that belong to crime dramas and courtrooms, not to living rooms scattered with wooden blocks and applesauce pouches that I didn't click anything yet. I sat still for a long time with the glow of the screen painting my hands a hard blue. Somewhere down the hall, a small voice barked out half a word in sleep and settled again. In my chest, the weather shifted. The storm wasn't here yet, but I could smell it. The morning after that late-night search, the world outside looked completely normal. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen counter, the coffee pot gurgled the way it always did, and my sons bickered over a toy fire truck like it was the last relic of civilization. To anyone else, life was running smoothly. But inside me, something had shifted, something I couldn't put back. The thought I had let myself whisper in the dark, that maybe only one of the boys was truly mine, didn't vanish with daylight. It clung to me, stubborn as static, weaving itself into the ordinary fabric of life. Every routine moment became a stage where the question performed. At breakfast, when one boy's messy grin mirrored my own childhood photos, the storm inside me calmed. Then the other would tilt his head, just so, revealing an angle of cheekbone that looked borrowed from someone else's portrait. And the storm surged again. At the playground, I found myself scanning other children, hunting for matches to that same unfamiliar curve of the nose or glint of hazel in the eyes. I watched strangers with a scrutiny that made me feel unhinged. Could someone out here, pushing their own child on a swing, unknowingly share blood with my son? It wasn't just physical features, either. Personalities were beginning to bloom, and while one boy carried the same impatient streak I remembered from my own childhood, the other moved with a quiet watchfulness, pausing before every choice as if running simulations in his head. People praised him for being thoughtful, but I couldn't shake the cruel whisper. Thoughtful like who? My wife noticed something, though she never named it. She'd catch me staring too long at a photo or hovering during bath time, my eyes flicking between the boys like I was studying them for an exam. She'd ask if I was tired, if work was pressing on me, if I needed a break. I'd nod, grateful for her ready explanations, but guilty too, because the truth I carried felt like a betrayal, not just of her, but of the boy himself. And yet the betrayal grew teeth. It followed me into the office, gnawing at my focus until spreadsheets blurred and deadlines slipped. It rode home with me in the car, whispering through the hum of traffic. At night, when I tucked them both into bed, I'd kiss their foreheads with equal tenderness. But inside me lived two competing certainties, one of belonging and one of doubt, by the time their third birthday approached. The storm in my chest had matured into something undeniable. It wasn't just a passing insecurity anymore. It was a shadow that shaped how I saw my family. And the more I tried to shove it back into silence, the louder it seemed to laugh at me. That's when I knew I couldn't keep living like this. One way or another, I needed an answer. Even if that answer risked blowing apart everything I thought my family was. The decision didn't arrive with clarity, like lightning tearing open the sky. It crept in slowly, wearing me down until resistance seemed more exhausting than surrender. One evening, after the boys had finally collapsed into sleep and the house hummed in its familiar silence, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the faint scratches on the wood from years of family dinners. My hands rested on either side of a laptop I hadn't opened yet, as if even touching it would set something irreversible into motion. That I thought about what it meant to know. Not suspect, not fear, not endlessly speculate, but to know, with cold certainty, whether the life I had built was rooted in truth or in a lie. The weight of that idea pressed down on me until my chest ached, but alongside the fear, there was something else: exhaustion. The constant double vision of seeing my sons as both mine and not mine at once was tearing me apart. Every laugh, every tantrum, every bedtime story was split down the middle, half joy, half dread. I realized then that whatever the cost, clarity would be kinder than this endless focus. I opened the laptop. The glow of the screen bathed the room in pale light, the rest of the house sunk in shadow. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly as though the machine might recoil from what I was about to ask of it. I typed the words with deliberate precision: home DNA test for paternity. Search results flooded the screen. Sleek websites promised quick answers, discreet packaging, scientific certainty. Their language was calm, clinical, like the truth was a product you could buy with a credit card and 2 swabs of saliva. I clicked one, then another, reading reviews, memorizing instructions, my pulse rising with each line. It struck me how terrifyingly simple it all was. 2 swabs, a prepaid envelope, a wait of a few days. The kind of steps a person might take without a second thought for ancestry curiosity or fun. But for me, every instruction felt like a knife pressing closer to the heart of my family. I sat there for nearly an hour, adding one kit to the cart, then closing the window, then reopening it again. My mind spun with what-ifs. If the test confirmed my fear, how would I look at my wife the same way again? Would I confront her, demand answers? Or would I crumble quietly under the truth, unwilling to destroy the family we had so carefully constructed? Eventually, I closed the laptop without purchasing anything. My palms were slick with sweat, my throat tight with a mixture of relief and shame. I had taken the first step, yes, but I wasn't ready to leap. Not yet, and still, the act of searching left a permanent crack in the wall of denial I'd been building. I couldn't pretend anymore that this was just insecurity. I had flirted with the truth, and now it stood at my door, waiting to be let in. The morning after my late-night spiral at the kitchen table, I tried to shake it off as just exhaustion. I told myself that everyone has irrational thoughts when they're tired. But the seed was already planted, and now every glance, every word from my wife carried new weight. At a tea breakfast, I watched her move around the kitchen, hair tied back, humming softly to herself as she poured cereal for the boys. On the surface, it was the same routine we'd lived 100 times. But underneath, I noticed things I had ignored before, or maybe things that had always been there, waiting for me to notice. Her phone never left her side. It wasn't new, but the vigilance with which she guarded it felt heavier now. If one of the boys reached for it, she'd snatch it back with a forced laugh, saying, "Careful, Mommy's phone is fragile." When it buzzed on the counter, she picked it up before even finishing her sentence to me, her eyes flicking quickly across the screen before tucking it back into her pocket. Then there was the way she spoke about the boys. I don't mean the usual motherly pride. I mean how her words sometimes carried a tone I couldn't quite place. Almost defensive. When I complimented our younger son's smile, she said too quickly, "Well, of course he looks like you. Everyone sees it." I hadn't even suggested otherwise. But the way her voice rushed, brittle around the edges, made something twist in my stomach. Over the following days, these moments stacked up like bricks in a wall I couldn't ignore. A hushed phone call in the hallway that ended abruptly when I walked past. A slip of paper with a man's name on it that I found folded into her purse. She claimed it was for a coworker, but her explanation was too rehearsed, too smooth. And the late nights. She always had a reason. Work projects, errands, helping a friend. But the glow of the clock at midnight as I lay awake in bed told a different story, one my mind filled with images I didn't want to see that I started feeling like a guest in my own home. Every detail sharpened into a potential clue, every interaction a test I wasn't sure I wanted to grade. Yet the more I noticed, the harder it was to dismiss. It was as if the house itself was whispering to me, urging me to peel back the layers, to finally confront what lay beneath. Still, I said nothing. Out loud, I played the part of the steady husband, the loving father. But inside, the silence screamed louder each day, echoing off the walls of my chest until I felt like I was splitting in two. The man who wanted to believe in his family, and the man who needed the truth, no matter how devastating it might be. The more I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking, the more reality pushed back. It was as if my wife's every movement had turned into a silent message, one that only I could hear, and it drove me insane trying to decode it. I began to notice patterns. She'd always leave her phone face down on the counter. When I walked into a room, she'd lock the screen with a flick so swift it almost looked rehearsed. And when she typed out messages, she leaned her body slightly away, just enough to shield the screen, as though it was muscle memory. Evenings became the hardest. After the boys were in bed, we used to unwind together, watch TV, talk about our days, sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. But now she'd retreat to the study, claiming she had paperwork to finish. The door was never fully closed, just slightly ajar, and I'd hear the faint rhythm of her voice. Low, soft, urgent. A phone call. The kind that doesn't sound like business. Point one night, I tried to catch a glimpse. I patted down the hall, careful not to make the old wooden floor creak, and stood outside the study. Her laugh floated out, a laugh that wasn't the one she used with me, but softer, almost intimate. My chest tightened like a vice. Then silence. A moment later, the chair scraped, and I hurried back before she could see me lurking. From that point, my mind no longer gave me peace. At work, I found myself staring at spreadsheets with eyes that wouldn't focus, wondering who she was texting. During dinner, I studied her every word, trying to pick apart the truth from lies. Even the boys noticed my distance. Our older one asked if I was sick because I seemed so far away. That cut deeper than I could admit. And yet, I couldn't stop. I started checking small things, subtle things. The mileage on her car. Receipts crumpled in her bag. The scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering faintly on her jacket when she came home late. Each discovery wasn't proof. Not yet. But together, they formed a puzzle that was beginning to take shape. But here was the worst part. I had no one to turn to. How could I tell friends or family that I suspected the woman I built a life with of lying to me, of betraying me in ways I couldn't even put into words? Until I had certainty, all I had was paranoia, and paranoia has a way of eating you alive from the inside. And so, I played along. Smiled at breakfast. Kissed her cheek when I left for work. Pretended I didn't notice how she flinched, just slightly, when I reached for her phone. But inside, my obsession was growing, building towards something I couldn't yet define, an explosion or a revelation. By this stage, suspicion had turned into a shadow that followed me everywhere. It crept into my mornings when I watched her rush to check her phone before even greeting me, and it clawed at me late at night when I lay beside her, listening to the faint tapping of keys under the blanket of darkness. I told myself I wouldn't look, that I wouldn't become that man, the kind who snoops, who stalks, who loses his dignity just to uncover a truth he might not be ready to face. But dignity doesn't stand a chance when every nerve in your body screams that the life you've built is a lie. One night, lying in bed, I noticed the faint glow of her phone lighting up the ceiling. She was turned slightly away, shoulders stiff, screen shielded from view. I closed my eyes and pretended to breathe evenly, the rhythm of someone fast asleep. That's when I heard it, the hushed whisper of her fingers moving across the glass, followed by the tiniest, almost imperceptible laugh. A laugh that didn't belong to me anymore. It was like a switch flipped inside me. My heart pounded against my ribs, my palms slick with sweat, as I realized I couldn't endure this silent torture any longer. I needed to know, even if it destroyed me. The next morning, when she went for her usual jog, I sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She rarely used it, always preferred her phone, but it was connected to the same cloud account. My hands trembled as I typed in her password, a combination of our wedding date and her childhood dog's name. It worked on the first try. That almost hurt more than anything else, because it meant she didn't believe she had anything to hide from me. My chest tightened as I opened the message app, my pulse hammering in my ears. Each second stretched into eternity. My fingers hovered, shaking, over the trackpad, but then I froze. Because in that exact moment, I heard the unmistakable creak of the front door. She had come back earlier than usual. I slammed the laptop shut and sat there, trying to calm my breathing, as the sound of her footsteps grew closer. My hands were still trembling, and I knew if she looked closely, she'd see the truth in my face, that I was no longer her trusting husband, but a man who was unraveling, inch by inch, under the weight of doubt. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway like a slow drum roll, each one hammering at the thin wall of composure I'd built in those few frantic seconds. The laptop was closed, but it still radiated warmth against my palms, a silent witness to what I had almost done. My heart beat so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. She came into the kitchen, a light sheen of sweat on her forehead from the jog, her breathing steady. She smiled faintly at me, the same soft smile she'd used for years, and for a split second I wondered if I was imagining everything. Maybe there was no secret life. Maybe it was all just stress, exhaustion, insecurity. But then she placed her phone face down on the counter. Always face down. As if the screen itself was a loaded weapon she couldn't let me see. My stomach twisted. I forced a casual tone, asking about her run, pretending to sip coffee though my mouth was dry as paper. She answered lightly, but there was a flicker in her eyes. Not guilt exactly, but something that made my skin crawl. A private amusement. A secret I wasn't in on. When she went to shower, I stared at the laptop again. It was right there, one click away from whatever truth I'd been circling. But my hands wouldn't move, because I realized that the second I opened that door, I couldn't close it again. All morning, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every sound was too sharp, every silence too heavy. In my head, I rehearsed conversations with her, accusations, confessions. In some versions, she denied everything. In others, she admitted to things that made my heart stop. By afternoon, I found myself standing at the window, watching her outside. She was laughing at a text, the phone cradled close like something precious. The sun caught her hair, making her look exactly like the woman I had fallen in love with. Only now, that image felt like a mask. That I told myself, one more day before I look. But the voice inside me, the one that had been whispering for weeks, was growing louder, sharper, more insistent. It said, if you wait too long, you'll lose everything. Not just her, but yourself. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my body rigid with tension. Her breathing beside me was slow, even, the sound of someone at peace. And yet the glow from her phone, faint, pulsing, constant, lit up the darkness between us like a warning flare. I realized then I was no longer living in my marriage. I was living in an investigation. And the evidence, or the lack of it, was killing me. The next morning, the tension inside me snapped like an overwound string. I couldn't take the gnawing anymore. My chest felt too tight, my head too loud, and every glance at her smiling face was like a blade cutting deeper. She left her laptop open on the dining table while she stepped into the garden to water the plants. It wasn't much time, but my hands moved before I could think, as if my body knew what my mind refused to admit. I sat down, clicked, and prayed my heartbeat wouldn't give me away. The screen came alive. For a second, it was nothing, just folders, documents, the neat desktop she always kept. I almost laughed at myself. But then, like a spiderweb catching the light, I saw a folder buried deeper than the rest. Ordinary name, ordinary date. But something about it called to me. I clicked. Inside were photos. Not work photos, not travel pictures, not family. These were intimate. Screenshots of messages, images taken in hotel rooms I didn't recognize, a timeline of a life she had never told me about. One picture stopped me cold. Her face reflected in a mirror, leaning against a man's shoulder, his hand around her waist. His face wasn't fully visible, but the outline, the posture, the casual claim in his touch. It was enough that my stomach turned so violently I thought I might be sick. My whole body wanted to shut down, to slam the laptop closed and erase what I'd seen. But my eyes wouldn't let me look away. Each file was another nail in the coffin of the life I thought we had. When I heard the back door creak, I forced the lid down just as her footsteps came closer. My hands were trembling, but I shoved them under the table, forcing my face blank. She came in, humming, wiping her damp hands on a towel. She looked at me and smiled. That same practiced smile. And all I could think was, I finally know. The mask has cracked, but what I didn't know yet was how deep her betrayal ran, or how far I would have to go to uncover the rest. From that moment, everything changed. The knowledge burned inside me like a secret poison, but I couldn't let it spill just yet. If I confronted her too soon, she'd twist it, deny it, maybe even erase the trail before I could piece together the full truth. No, I had to be smarter. I became an actor in my own home. Every morning, I greeted her with the same easy tone, the same half smile, pretending nothing had shifted. But behind the mask, my eyes cataloged every detail, every move she made. Where she left her phone, what apps she closed a little too quickly, the receipts she tucked away at the bottom of drawers that I started keeping my own folder, hidden on an encrypted drive. Every scrap of evidence went there. Copies of her emails, quietly forwarded to myself when she left her accounts open. Screenshots of bank statements showing money flowing to accounts I didn't recognize. I traced one transaction and nearly froze. A booking for a luxury hotel suite, the date matching the night she'd sworn she was visiting her sister. The house itself betrayed her too. A faint trace of cologne on the guest towels. A wine glass shoved into the dishwasher that didn't match any set we owned. Tiny breadcrumbs she never thought I'd notice. But I noticed everything now. At night, when she drifted to sleep beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing her breath steady and calm while mine raced. My heart ached, not just with anger, but with a hollow kind of mourning. I wasn't just collecting evidence of betrayal. I was documenting the slow death of the life I thought we'd built. Yet part of me wanted more than proof. I wanted to understand. Who was this man she kept slipping away to? Why him? Why the lies? So I set a plan. Instead of exposing her, I would let her keep weaving the web, while I pulled at the strands one by one, until the whole thing unraveled in my hands. It happened late one night, almost by accident. She had left her laptop open on the kitchen table, the screen dim but not locked. Normally, she was meticulous about shutting everything down, as if she knew the danger of leaving her secrets unattended. But this time, exhaustion must have made her careless. I sat down, pretending I was just passing through to grab a glass of water. My hand hovered above the mouse, my pulse drumming in my ears. A voice inside whispered, "Don't do it. Don't look. Whatever you find will change everything forever." But another voice, sharper, colder, pushed me forward. When the screen lit up, it revealed an email draft. Not sent, but saved. My eyes scanned the words, and it felt like the ground tilted beneath me. She wasn't just writing to someone. She was writing to him. The name at the top was a name I knew. Not some stranger from across town. Not a shadowy figure hidden behind hotel walls. No, it was Mark. Mark, my best friend since college. The man who stood by my side at my wedding. The one I trusted more than a brother. The man who had eaten at my table, laughed with me in my living room, held my son in his arms as if he were family. The words blurred as rage and disbelief crashed together in my chest. She called him the only person who understands me. She wrote about their nights together, about the future they imagined once things changed. She even mentioned me, not with love, not even with hate, but with pity, like I was some fool standing in the way of their happiness. It wasn't just betrayal. It was annihilation. Two of the people I trusted most had joined forces in a secret life behind my back that I sat there in silence, my fingers gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My entire world, my marriage, my friendship, my sense of self, collapsed in a single screen of text. And yet, as the fury roared inside me, I felt an eerie calm slide over my thoughts. Now I knew. The suspicions, the fragments, the late nights, the hidden receipts, they all crystallized into one brutal truth. The question was no longer if she was lying. It was no longer who. Now, the only question left was, what would I do with this knowledge? After the shock, I felt less like a man betrayed and more like an investigator called to a scene. Emotions still flashed through me: rage, grief, a hollow, ridiculous sense of embarrassment, but they no longer ruled me. They sharpened into purpose. I told myself I would not let anger be the architect of my decisions. I would be deliberate, patient, surgical. First, I secured what I already had: copies, duplicates, encrypted drives hidden in places no one would think to look, a utility box under the garage stairs, a hollowed-out book on my office shelf. Each screenshot, each email draft, every time-stamped receipt went into those folders with the sterile ritual of evidence cataloging. The act of organizing calmed me. It turned chaos into something I could manage. Next came timing. I knew the power of a spectacle, the way a sudden reveal could shred people, or worse, allow them to perform and manipulate the narrative. I didn't want that. I didn't want a public collapse where accusations could be tossed like confetti and truth lost in noise. I wanted them cornered with facts they could not spin away, and I wanted my sons to be shielded from the theatrical ugliness. So I mapped their patterns like a detective. Mark's weekly habits, his usual Fridays at the pub, the days he met my wife for coffee. I tracked login times I'd found on the accounts, cross-referenced hotel bookings with her work trips, and slowly built a timeline that read like a story with dates and places and witnesses I could call on if needed. Each confirmation tightened the net that I also anticipated their defenses. Mark would likely deny, deflect, claim loneliness or manipulation. My wife might pivot to remorse and plead for privacy, or she might vanish. I needed options for every path. I made quiet appointments, not with lawyers yet, not with friends, but with practical services, a secure cloud account to back up everything offsite, a private mailbox where I could receive certified documents without anyone checking the hallway, and a safety plan for the boys in case everything combusted. It was ugly to plan like that, but it felt necessary. I practiced my tone in the mirror at night, not to rehearse lines, but to steady the voice inside me that would speak with clarity, not with the ragged edge of accusation. I wrote drafts of what I wanted to say, short, factual, devoid of the theatrics my heart wanted. This is what you did. This is what I have. This is what happens next. The drafts helped me find discipline, a way to expose without imploding. There was also a part of the plan that surprised me. I arranged for a neutral third party to be present when I finally confronted them, not to arbitrate, but to witness and to keep the exchange from becoming a he said she said spectacle. It could be a trusted counselor, a mutual friend with no stake, someone who would later attest to the words exchanged if the truth got buried in accusations. The idea of involving another person felt strange, like admitting I needed help to hold my own life together. But I wanted the facts to stand on their own, beyond my trembling voice. Between the compiling and the planning, I tried to live the remainder of my days as if nothing had changed. I picked up the boys from school with the same practice cheer, folded laundry, and answered their questions about math homework with a patience that sometimes surprised me. My sons were the only bright, uncomplicated things in the house, their small hands sticky with jam, their innocent complaints about bedtime. I made sure they never saw me surfing the evidence at midnight, or felt the weight I carried like an invisible coat I could not take off. When I slept, it was in fits and starts. I dreamed in fragments, hotel room corners, a laugh I couldn't place, Mark's silhouette wide and familiar. But each morning the plan lay there, waiting for me to fill it in. I had the evidence. I had the sequence. I had a small circle of precautions. What I still needed was the final move, a way to reveal them that would strip away excuses and leave only what was true to. So I waited, building a quiet, immovable argument out of files and dates and receipts. Each day I walked through the house with the assuredness of someone who had decided not to be a victim of chaos. The plan was not about revenge. It was about clarity. I wanted facts to speak, not the flailing mess of a shattered heart. By the time I closed the last folder and encrypted it, I felt oddly relieved. The knowledge that everything I needed to prove the betrayal was safe somewhere my hands could reach gave me a strange, brittle peace. The mask had fully come off, And now the structure beneath it would be exposed, not in a frenzy, but with the cold, exact light of evidence laid out on a table. Choosing the right witness was harder than I expected. It couldn't be family, too biased. It couldn't be a coworker, too close to gossip. It had to be someone whose loyalty wasn't tangled up in history. Someone who could sit in a room and observe like a stone dropped in still water, simply recording the ripples. That's when I thought of Jonathan, an old university friend. We weren't close anymore, not in the way that meant birthdays or holidays together. But he had always been steady, calm, rational. He worked now as a mediator in legal disputes, a career built on staying neutral while emotions burned like wildfire around him. Exactly the kind of presence I needed that I reached out under the pretense of catching up. It felt strange, almost dishonest, but within minutes of sitting across from him at a quiet cafe, I remembered why I'd trusted him years ago. He had that same quiet patience, the ability to listen without rushing to fill the silence. When I finally told him what was happening, my suspicions about my sister and my best friend plotting to undermine me for the inheritance, his face didn't twist into disbelief or pity. He just absorbed it, steady as ever. He asked careful questions. What I'd seen, what I suspected, what proof I actually had. And when I admitted that so far I had fragments, overheard whispers, financial oddities, strained family dinners, he nodded slowly, like he was fitting the pieces together in his own mind. I can be there, he said, almost matter-of-factly. Not to interfere, just to observe. If you need someone neutral when things come to a head, I'll stand in that space. It was like an anchor dropped inside me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't drowning alone in paranoia. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining shadows. I had someone who could stand in the room when the final confrontation came. Someone who would see exactly what I saw, walking home that evening. The city lights looked sharper, colder, but for the first time I welcomed it. The plan was no longer just mine. The pieces were aligning, the evidence mounting. And soon the two people who thought they'd played me like a fool would learn I wasn't nearly as blind as they believed. Once Jonathan agreed to stand as a witness, the gears in my head finally began to turn with purpose. Until then, my anger had been raw, unfocused, like a storm lashing against the walls of my chest. But now, with a neutral observer secured, I had the framework for something more deliberate, more devastating. The first step was silence. I stopped reacting to my sister's little digs, the subtle shifts in tone whenever she mentioned the will, the sly looks exchanged between her and my so-called best friend. I forced myself to nod, to smile faintly, to look distracted. If they thought I had grown passive, they would grow bolder. Bolder meant careless. Careless meant evidence that home. I began collecting in earnest. I went back through bank records, scanning every line with a hunter's eye. I found traces of transactions that didn't fit, small transfers that linked to accounts I didn't recognize, accounts later tied to my friends' business ventures. I photographed them, cataloged them, built a private archive. Emails, too, became breadcrumbs. Phrases that seemed harmless on the surface. Our project, keeping it in the family, he doesn't need to know yet, took on darker weight when read together. I printed them out, slid them into a folder, each page a brick in the wall. I was quietly building against them. But more than documents, I watched. Every family dinner became a performance, and I played my role well. I noticed how my sister poured wine a little too eagerly for my parents. How my friends' laugh turned hollow whenever money came up. How their eyes met across the table with an electricity that had nothing to do with friendship. And through it all, I said nothing. I let them believe I was drifting further from the center, that I was too distracted, too blind, too naive to see what was happening around me. Inside, though, every quiet nod, every blank smile, was another stitch in the net I was preparing to cast. The final act wasn't ready yet, but it was forming. I could feel it in my bones. There would come a night when all of this, the whispers, the lies, the manipulations, would crash down in one controlled moment. And when it did, I wouldn't be standing there empty-handed. The hardest part of any plan is timing. Too early, and you tip your hand before the trap is ready. Too late, and the damage has already cemented itself beyond repair. I knew if I wanted to expose them, it had to be on a stage where no denial, no clever spin could save them. That stage, inevitably, had to be a family gathering. My parents trusted appearances, and my sister and friend had spent months perfecting theirs. Around the dinner table, they shined brightest, painting themselves as dutiful, loyal, trustworthy. If their mask was to crack, it had to happen in front of the very people they sought to manipulate. So, I waited. Our father's birthday was approaching, one of those traditions my family never skipped. A night where the dining room would be heavy with roasted meats, polished silver, and the laughter of relatives we rarely saw. A night where words carried weight, because every word echoed in so many ears that I began to prepare. I rehearsed how to reveal each piece of evidence without sounding bitter or vindictive. My anger had to be controlled, measured, wrapped in fact. I didn't want to look like a jealous brother crying foul. I wanted to look like the only one who had been watching clearly. The only one willing to protect what was rightfully ours. Jonathan, the neutral witness, would be there too, not as a family friend, but as a quiet observer in the background. Someone my parents respected without fully realizing why. His presence would anchor my words, proof that I wasn't imagining the storm swirling around me. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I found myself watching the clock more than I should. Every day felt stretched, taut, as if the walls of the house themselves were bracing for impact. My sister and my friend continued their little games, blissfully unaware that the stage was already being built beneath their feet, a stage on which they would perform their final act, one they hadn't rehearsed for. And as I pictured it, the fear in their eyes, the silence that would fall when the truth was laid bare, I almost smiled. Almost. Because if I had learned anything through this ordeal, it was that victory wasn't in the gloating. Victory was in the patience. The night of my father's birthday arrived cloaked in a tension I carried like a second skin. The house was alive with warmth. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the smell of roasted lamb and garlic seeping into every corner. On the surface, it was a celebration. But beneath it, a storm waited that I watched my sister glide through the room, all charm and poise, her hand resting lightly on our parents' shoulders as if she alone anchored them. My so-called best friend stood at her side, filling plates, refilling wine glasses, laughing too loudly at my father's jokes. To anyone else, they were the picture of loyalty and care. To me, they were actors desperate to keep the curtain from falling. The moment came when my father raised his glass for a toast. His voice trembled with age but still carried that undeniable authority that once silenced boardrooms. He spoke of legacy, of gratitude for family, of the future he hoped to see. And that was when I stood. All eyes turned to me. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain the crystal in my hand would shatter. But my voice was steady, calmer than I felt inside. I spoke of family too, of loyalty, of betrayal hiding in plain sight. At first, there were confused glances, nervous laughs. Then I placed the first piece of evidence on the table, Jonathan's quiet testimony, corroborating things no one else could know. Then came the emails, the financial advice that funneled money away, the subtle nudges meant to poison my parents against me. Silence fell like a stone. My sister's face drained of color. My friend's smile faltered, then disappeared altogether. They tried to protest, of course, stumbling words, weak excuses, insisting I'd misunderstood. But the room wasn't on their side anymore. The evidence was too clear. Jonathan's presence too undeniable that my parents said nothing at first, but their silence was worse than shouting. It was the silence of realization, of shame, of betrayal finally seen for what it was. My father's hand, once steady on his glass, trembled as he set it down. My mother's eyes brimmed with tears, and in that moment, I didn't gloat. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The truth had already done what anger never could. Their masks had slipped, and there was no putting them back on. For the first time in months, I felt air fill my lungs freely. The legacy my parents wanted to protect would not be built on lies. Not anymore. In the weeks that followed, the dust settled, but the echoes of that night lingered in every corner of our lives. My sister moved out of our parents' house under the guise of needing space, but everyone knew it was exile wrapped in choice. My so-called best friend disappeared almost overnight, his number disconnected, his social media wiped clean. The will was rewritten. Not in anger, but in clarity. My father, still shaken, told me one evening that betrayal changes a man more than war ever could. My mother confessed she felt guilt for not seeing, for letting whispers cloud their judgment. They didn't disown my sister, but trust. Trust doesn't return once it's been shattered. As for me, I learned that truth isn't just a weapon, it's a weight. Carrying it, uncovering it, exposing it. None of it feels like victory. It feels like survival. That I still walk past the places where my best friend and I used to spend late nights laughing about our futures. I still remember my sister braiding my hair when we were children, telling me she'd always be on my side. Those memories cut deeper now because they're proof of what I lost. But there's something else too. A strange, quiet strength I never knew I had. Because when your own blood betrays you, when the people you trusted most try to erase you, and you still stand tall in the wreckage, that's when you realize you don't need anyone's approval to exist. I am not defined by the schemes they wove or the inheritance they tried to steal. I am defined by the fact that I pulled the mask off their faces and forced the world to see the truth. And that, more than any legacy or money, is the only inheritance I truly needed. Thank you for watching this story on True Tales Hub. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next story. That we post new tales twice a day, and each one comes with unexpected twists you won't see coming.